Madam President, I rise today to discuss President Obama's proposed fiscal year 2011 budget and proposed path forward for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which we all know as NASA. Even though Colorado doesn't have a NASA facility, this proposed budget and the major changes to NASA's direction included in it have major implications for thousands of Coloradans. Madam President, I was the chairman on the House side of the Space Subcommittee, and I know what space means to Colorado. I know what it means to our nation. Yesterday, Senator Bennett and I had the opportunity to meet with NASA Administrator, former General and now Administrator Charlie Bolden, to urge him to reevaluate the decision included in the President's budget request for NASA to terminate the Constellation program. This program is developing the successor to the retiring space shuttle known as the Orion capsule and the Ares rocket. Those two technologies will be teamed up in the planning that was brought together. Now, we had a frank and a productive discussion with Administrator Bolden. Senator Bennett and I impressed upon him the importance of this program, especially the development of the Orion capsule to thousands of jobs in Colorado and, frankly, to America's leadership more broadly in space. General Bolden assured us that he wants to be flexible and work with Congress on this NASA budget, and that he's committed to human space flight. In other words, Madam President, the President's budget request is the beginning of a long process, and I was pleased to hear General Bolden is set on working with elected members of this Congress to chart a future course for NASA and America's leadership in space. And I look forward to working with General Bolden as this unfolds. If I might, Madam President, I'd like to take a few moments to describe the aerospace community in Colorado. Though we don't host a NASA facility, Colorado has the second largest aerospace economy in the nation, behind only California. We have a talented and educated workforce, and our colleges and universities have deep ties to NASA, private aerospace companies, and federal research laboratories. We have many businesses that partner with NASA and the military to provide launch services and satellite development, as well as a number of startup companies that are pushing the boundaries of what is possible in privately financed access to space. We can also, in Colorado, boast of the two key military space commands, NORAD and the Air Force Space Command, and three Air Force bases with strong space missions, Buckley, Peterson, and Schriever. In short, Madam President, Colorado's aerospace enterprise brings together the government and commercial sectors, as well as the military and civil sectors. And for all these reasons, I pay close attention to NASA and to the administration's vision for the agency. And the significant changes in the President's fiscal 2011 budget request demands an especially hard look. And I know many of my Senate colleagues feel the same way. I've been reviewing the President's budget since it was released in February, and as I noted earlier, Senator Bennett and I shared our concerns with General Bolden yesterday. Let me start by saying that there's much to like in the President's budget. First, it supports an extension of the International Space Station until 2020 and possibly beyond. Completing the station has been a long time coming, and I'm pleased to see that this administration's commitment to fully utilizing it past the previous end date of 2015. Second, the budget includes important new investments in science and aeronautics research. My goal is to balance each of NASA's four mission priorities: Earth science, space exploration, and aeronautics. The President's request for non-exploration priorities represents a far-sighted investment that should pay large dividends. Also, the budget includes an additional $6 billion over 5 years, which is, Madam President, especially notable at a time when many agencies are seeing flat or declining budgets. Much of this investment will go towards developing transformative technologies and propulsion systems that will help NASA cross into new frontiers. However, the elephant in the room is understandably the proposed cancellation of the Constellation program, which is to be supplanted by commercial development of human space flight. Now, a purely commercial approach to human space flight may be the future, but I'm concerned that it also runs the risk of diminishing American leadership in space. And Madam President, if that happens, that would be a great shame. It would be penny wise, but I fear it would be pound foolish. And let me be frank, this move would hit Colorado especially hard. Well over 1,000 Coloradans work directly on one aspect of Constellation or another. And in addition, the Jefferson County Economic Council estimates that work on Constellation supports nearly 4,000 additional Colorado jobs and $300 million worth of economic activity in the metro Denver area. And as you can imagine, Madam President, those kinds of numbers give me real pause. And they're especially worrisome in today's economic conditions. Now, the budget proposal leaves broader questions unanswered as well. After the planned retirement of the space shuttle next year, the United States will be without the capacity to launch humans into space, including to the International Space Station. And at that point, we will be forced to purchase access to space on Russian Soyuz spacecraft. Constellation was supposed to minimize the gap in our ability to access low Earth orbit, otherwise known as LEO. And now the President is proposing to rely on the commercial sector to minimize the gap instead. I strongly support development of commercial launch capabilities and space services. And I look forward to the day when the commercial sector can provide these services, freeing NASA to focus on development of new exploration technologies and human missions beyond low Earth orbit. And I'm confident that that day will come. However, I've not seen sufficient proof from the administration that that day is close at hand. The commercial sector has yet to prove it can safely put a human into orbit. And Madam President, should the commercial sector fail to deliver human access to space, America will be reliant on Russian-procured launch services to the space station and to low Earth orbit for the foreseeable future. In my opinion, that is an unacceptable position for our nation. The United States and Russia have enjoyed a very productive partnership in space. It's been good for our country and good for space exploration. We should cooperate and share resources wherever possible. But I'm concerned about what an indefinite reliance on Russian launch services will mean for our leadership in space. Canceling Constellation has other important implications for our national security. NASA is a prime customer for the U.S. Space Launch Industrial Base, which we rely on to sustain our strategic deterrence mission and to ensure access to space. These issues are especially important to me as I sit on the Armed Services Committee. Department of Defense officials have stated that Constellation's cancellation could increase the current price of propulsion systems for our launch vehicles. The Department of Defense is looking at the cost impacts, but we will not have clear answers until this summer. Congress needs this information before deciding whether to approve the President's budget request. Now, Madam President, I don't want to appear naive about the problems this administration faced in crafting a NASA budget and direction for the future. The Constellation program, as currently resourced, is clearly unsustainable, in the words of the review of the Human Spaceflight Plans Committee, more commonly known as the Augustine Committee. The committee went on to say that we're perpetrating the perilous practice of pursuing goals that do not match allocated resources. That's simply not a recipe for U.S. leadership in space either. In the midst of crafting this budget for NASA, the administration also faced the worst economic conditions in a generation. And I can appreciate the difficulty of designing a sustainable plan for NASA within today's fiscal constraints. We cannot and should not ask NASA to do more with less. And transferring routine space operations to the commercial sector appears to be an attractive, potentially money-saving alternative. But I know I'm not alone in believing that Congress should not support this budget based on what we know now. Terminating Constellation does not make sense. But we should be open to restructuring the program in a way that preserves American leadership in space and protects jobs. So, Madam President, where do we go from here. The President will be speaking later this week in Florida. It will be his first set of comments on the proposed NASA budget. I appreciate the fact that the President is tackling the problems with Constellation head-on. However, he needs to explain his plan better. And I hope the President will begin to answer the questions I and many of my colleagues in Congress have asked. I hope he will begin to articulate a plan for NASA that is, in the words of the Augustine Committee, worthy of a great nation. I do not believe we are there yet, but we will get there. Madam President, one of the lessons I learned as a mountaineer came on the 10th day of what was supposed to be a 7-day climb of Mount McKinley. And at that critical moment in our climb, I learned that when you're all the way in, you will find a way. And I believe that the American people are all the way in with NASA. I know this Congress is. NASA's mission of exploration resonates with each of us. That mission transcends programs, and it transcends budgets, and it transcends politics. It's endured the end of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, and it will soon endure the end of the space shuttle. Unfortunately, the history of NASA is littered with canceled programs with little to show for them. I do not want to see the same happen with Constellation, nor do I want to continue on an unsustainable course. The challenge before us is to ensure that NASA's programs and budgets are worthy of its mission. Over the coming weeks and months, I will be working with my colleagues in Congress and the administration to find the right way to further NASA's mission. I believe there is a sweet spot to be found that includes many of the positive aspects of the President's proposal. But the American people deserve answers on the President's vision for our nation's leadership in human space travel. While some changes need to be made, I believe the Constellation program has advanced an important mission. It would be highly disappointing to leave behind the significant investments we've made in Constellation without anything to show for them. We will find a budget that works for NASA, for Congress, and for Colorado. Madam President, we have to because we are in all the way. Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.